Welcome back to another episode of SugarMamma's Fireplay, the podcast where we ignite your financial independence, retire early goals and dreams, and help you build a life on your own terms, filled with confidence, clarity, and intention. I am your host, financial planner, Canna Campbell, and today we're talking about one of the biggest milestones when it comes to your financial independence, and that is buying your very first home. And of course, the range of different government support schemes designed to help you take that leap onto the property ladder. Now, this episode is perfect for anyone who's dreaming of home ownership but is feeling naturally very overwhelmed by the hurdles, particularly when it comes to the cost of entry. But what I want to do in this particular episode is talk about strategy, solutions, tools, and ideas. Because when we do this correctly, the right way, the first time, buying your first home can not only give you a great sense of security and stability, but it also can become part of a smart investment for your future. So what we're going to do is explore and break down all the options that are available to help you get your foot on the property ladder with a helping hand from the government. I'm going to share with you the pros and the cons. The cons actually that a lot of people don't actually talk about but really should. I'm even going to share with you what I think of each one and whether I would personally use this myself if I was trying to buy a property right now. So let's waste no time at all and get started. So the first cab off the rank is the First Home Guarantee, often known under the acronym FHBG. What exactly is it? So this is a federal scheme and it lets eligible first home buyers purchase a property with as little as a 5% deposit without having to pay lender's mortgage insurance. Now, LMI, as it's often referred to, can easily cost over $10,000. So this is pretty substantial savings here. The way that it works is the government guarantees up to 15% of the loan, but it has to be a new or existing home to live in. It can't actually be an investment property. And there is only a selected number of lenders that actually offer this. I believe there's only around about 32, which can make it a little bit frustrating if the home loan product isn't exactly what you need or necessarily the most competitive interest rate for you. So that's essentially how it works. Now, to be eligible, obviously you have to be a first home buyer, and there are some income caps apply. At the moment, it's around about $125,000 per annum for singles or $200,000 per annum for couples. And of course, there are property price caps that apply depending on the state or the region that you're buying this property in, and of course where you live. I'll give you an example. So say we take Jane. Jane earns, say, $95,000 a year, and she's buying a property for, say, $600,000, say in Sydney. Now, normally she would need a 20% deposit to avoid mortgage insurance. So she'd need approximately $120,000. Now, that is a huge amount of money to try and save up. And of course, that takes a long time. And that can be really frustrating when the property market is growing at a faster rate than you can possibly save. So this is something that actually could potentially really help. Now, under the First Home Guarantee, she would only need a deposit of $30,000. That is a 5% deposit. And she would in fact save around $14,000 in not having to take out lender's mortgage insurance. So she's actually able to really purchase a property with a tiny deposit, something will hopefully be a lot faster to save up and secure that property. That is a huge benefit I see from this. And $14,000 is a huge amount of money to save in lender's mortgage insurance. And it means you're in the market and there's an element of, for savings if you're sticking to your mortgage repayments and paying it down. And of course, if you bought well and you bought into a great area, that $600,000 property can increase in value. And of course, you can do the things to help increase its value, like renovate or update it or add value to it. The great thing about this particular offer is it can be a house, an apartment, a townhouse. It can even be a house and land package, which also includes off-plan deals. And of course, it just could include land itself, which I think is quite relevant because a lot of people were thinking the limits are so low, how could it possibly help me? But, you potentially can find land under these limits, which means this could give you some substantial, savings and benefit. Now, I want to look at this with a very balanced approach, and I'm going to talk about the cons. And I'll be talking about the pros and cons for each of these, but I want to make sure that you understand all the different options that are available to you. So the downsides are, as I'd say, obviously there are property price caps. Let's clear the elephant in the room. Yes, these caps are pretty low and they vary from state to state. And, a lot of people think, well, it's great to have this, but where can I possibly find a property for under these ridiculous limits? They're way too low. And I do agree with that. They need to be adjusted and reflect the true property values that we're seeing right now. The other downside of this is a really concerning one. This is something that no one really talks about, and that is taking on a larger debt because you haven't had to have the full 20% deposit. So with this example of Jane, using a $30,000 deposit, she's got a substantial mortgage to service on her own. If she's buying something for $600,000, obviously excluding stamp duty, her mortgage alone is $570,000. So, but if obviously she had a bigger deposit, this would be significantly less. So you are, at the end of the day, with this, taking on a larger amount of debt. And obviously the bigger the loan, the bigger the interest costs are to you. And if interest rates go up, this could be, seriously compromise your financial well-being. So we need to bear that in mind and look at this with, a practical, rational mindset. Also, there is a danger, and again, this is another one that no one really talks about, and that is if the property falls in value, you could get into a position where you're in a negative equity territory. Now, because you're buying this property with such a small deposit, obviously there's a large loan, naturally, which we just discussed. Now, say that $600,000 property that's got a $570,000 home loan drops in value and say it comes off by, say, 10%. It's now worth, say, $540. This is what we call negative territory. You actually owe more money than what that property is worth. Now, this can be very frightening and make people feel extremely unstable, which is kind of ironic because a lot of people buy property to create that sense of stability. Now, of course, it doesn't really matter unless you're going to sell or you're in a position where you're forced to sell, but it's something to bear in mind. You've got to make sure that you look at everything with eyes wide open. Take off those rose-tinted glasses. And obviously, the other downside is you've got to live in this property for at least 12 months. You can't just buy it as an investment property. However, obviously after the 12-month period, yes, you can turn it into an investment property. So if you do get stuck where you do fall into negative equity territory, you have trouble servicing the loan, particularly if there are interest rate rises, there is the option obviously of renting it out, but you've got to obviously stick to that 12-month owner-occupied requirement. Now, the question, would I do this myself if I was trying to get into the property market? Yeah, I would. However, I would be very careful about the dangers involved, and I would do my absolute best as soon as possible to try and safeguard myself and protect myself from these real risks. So what I would be doing is not just settling with a 5% deposit. Obviously, I'd be getting all my ducks lined up with a mortgage broker as soon as I had my 5% deposit. Whilst I was searching around for the property, going through the process, I wouldn't stop saving. I'd try and fatten up my deposit as much as possible, but also not increasing necessarily my budget. I'd try and make my mortgage repayment as small as possible, my mortgage as small as possible, and my deposit as big as possible, so that I'm not under that particular stress. And whilst I was going through that settlement period, which is, exciting, but also a daunting time, and I'd also be working frantically to, have all my mortgage repayments ready so that I'm not actually waiting a month to make my first mortgage repayment. I actually make that mortgage repayment a month in advance, and that can have a significant impact in saving valuable time and interest, particularly in the first 5 years of a home loan. So I would be looking, once I was in the property, then obviously to make extra repayments on a regular basis, but also lump sum repayments, bonuses, tax refunds. If I sold anything, any sort of windfalls along the way, I'd be putting it towards that mortgage so I never had that risk of running into negative territory. And of course, if I ever got into trouble after the 12-month owner-occupied requirement had been met, I would most definitely consider renting that property out before being put into a position where I may have to look at selling. Because obviously if you sell, you've got to look at getting back into the market again and obviously incurring mortgage insurance potentially again because you wouldn't necessarily qualify as a first homeowner anymore. And of course, the dreaded stamp duty costs. So yes, I would use this, but I would be very, very careful to safeguard my financial position. Next up is the First Home Super Saver Scheme. Now, what exactly is this? And again, the acronym is quite long, it's FHSSS. So, is where you use your superannuation account to save for a home deposit. Obviously, you are leveraging off the tax benefits of superannuation. So this is how it works. You make voluntary contributions of up to $15,000 a year or up to $50,000 in total. When I say voluntary, these are typically after-tax contributions. And you can withdraw these funds, plus any possible earnings that you may have incurred during this period, to put towards your home deposit. So an example of this is Michael, let's say. He salary sacrifices in a situation, say $10,000 into super over the last 2 years. And instead of being taxed at his marginal tax rate, which is say 32.5%, which is the average Australian's tax rate, he's taxed at 15%. So this is pretty good. It's almost, it's cutting in half his tax savings. So it saves him approximately $3,500 in tax, which obviously boosts his deposit. Now, the benefits of this are the tax savings, straight up. And of course, that obviously makes it a lot faster to save up because he's got an extra, $3,500 to put towards his deposit, which is really valuable, and it boosts that deposit with a little bit of a lifestyle sacrifice because obviously his salary sacrificed to help build that money. And of course, if you've been successful and smart or even lucky, dare I say, with your investments within superannuation, obviously you can take some of those earnings. But I will say this, be very careful of doing this because typically you would not take investment risk and invest aggressively with your super money if you knew that you were going to be withdrawing some of this out. So it is actually a bit of a double-edged sword. It is fraught with danger. Now that then leads me obviously to the cons. Okay, this is quite a complicated process. You actually need to apply for a determination to allow that money to be released and follow some really strict withdrawal rules. You also need to be really careful because once that determination has been applied or approved, you've actually got 12 months to use it, otherwise it expires and you've got to reapply again. So you've got to be very careful in thinking about when you're going to buy and obviously the settlement period and the terms and conditions, and you really do need an experienced mortgage broker who's done this more than a few times to help guide you through this process so that it's smooth and you don't get hit with any nasty surprises. The other thing is obviously that you need to plan ahead. This is not something you do as a last minute strategy. You need to think about maybe if you see yourself buying a property in the next 5 years, start looking at doing this sooner rather than later and think about how you want to actually strategically plan this so that you make the most of the tax savings. And as I said, you also need to be careful of the rules. The rules are very complicated and you really do need a professional guiding you. The big thing is also, if you change your mind, bad luck. That money is stuck in super. So you might think, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put the extra maximum $50,000 into super and buy something, but all of a sudden you change your mind and decide, you know what, I don't actually want to buy a property more. I don't want the stress and responsibility of that. I'm going to do something completely different. You can't get that $50,000 back out. It's stuck, and it's stuck there until you meet a condition of release, which is typically when you go to retire, which for most of us will be between 55 and 65. So, you've really got to keep that in mind. Now, I will say at the same time, for people who don't have any self-control or just if they see money, they tend to spend it, this can be something that adds a level of self-discipline and self-control for them. But again, this is only for first home buyers. And you obviously need to check all the requirements involved to make sure you actually qualify. And if you're wondering, once I bought this home by using this particular scheme, can it become an investment further down the track? Yes, you obviously need to read the terms and conditions and make sure you follow those guidelines so that you don't get hit with any nasty surprises. But yes, potentially you could turn this into an investment property. Now, here's the big thing. Would I do this myself? Hell no. Absolutely not. I would not do this. Now, this is more of a personal thing than a professional thing, but the issue I have with this is superannuation is actually a really serious and very powerful financial product and strategy. It is not a savings account. It is something that helps fund your future financial independence and freedom when you need it the most, and that is retirement. It is not an online savings account. It is invested and it should be treated with respect. I find that this particular scheme blurs the boundaries and the lines with what is for your future financial well-being and what is more of a lifestyle choice. Because at the end of the day, I really believe and feel that a home is a lifestyle asset more than an actual financial asset. Yes, it adds value. Yes, it gives you options to build further wealth. But at the end of the day, the interest isn't tax deductible and doesn't make you income. So it's not technically a financial product. I think superannuation is one of the biggest and most beneficial strategies and tools to have in your toolkit when it comes to building wealth. They should be separate. And as I mentioned a second ago, your superannuation money is essentially an investment portfolio. That money should be invested for long-term capital growth and income opportunities. If you are doing this, you need to make sure that that money that's eventually going to be withdrawn to help pay for the deposit on your home, that it is not subject to market volatility and risk. You'd hate to see that, that $50,000 that you put into your superannuation, that when you went to pull it out, the markets have pulled back or crashed even, and it's not quite $50,000 you're pulling back out. It's say 40 or 45. This is not going to work, and I think this is really dangerous. We need to be encouraging people to put money into super and keep it there, because that's that's how it works for us. And that's going to give us the freedom that we all desire and we are really worthy of. So yeah, I don't like this one. I don't think it's actually appropriate at all. And I question the ethics behind this. The third one is obviously the stamp duty concessions and exemptions. So this is where some states will actually waive or reduce your stamp duty costs for first home buyers. New South Wales, there's no stamp duty for homes up to $800,000. There's obviously concessions up to $1 million. Victoria, there's no duty under $600,000. And obviously this is the time of recording this podcast, and reduces over time. Same with Queensland as well. So this savings when it comes to stamp duty has huge upfront savings. I mean, stamp duty is an absolute bitch. It's the part that sucks when it comes to buying a property. As excited as you are when you look at that dotted line as to how much money you need to pay in stamp duty, you can feel really rather nauseous, and especially when you know how long it's taken for you to save up your deposit to buy a place. So I love these savings. Obviously, the downside is obviously that the property price caps may not actually work for you. You might be actually buying something over these limits or just over those limits, which is really frustrating to think you just miss out on these potential savings. And of course, the rules vary from state to state. And again, I agree. I think these limits, these caps are way too low. We need to look at adjusting them to make them realistic as to what people really have to pay for property these days. Now, a reminder, stamp duty is actually a sunk cost. If you do qualify for an exemption, it obviously makes it a lot easier to purchase, and it frees up your funds for, maybe adding value to the property by doing some renovations or helping pay down debt, or perhaps even, starting to include maybe an investment strategy through debt recycling. And of course, yes, you can turn this home into an investment, after you meet the terms and conditions. So these are it's worth knowing and understanding how the stamp duty concessions and exemptions work so that you can try and make the most of them if they're actually applicable to you and your price point. The next is the first home owner grant. Now, this is a once-off cash payment for new builds, only new builds, or off-the-plan properties. And this is how it works. So the amounts vary, and it varies from state to state. I believe in New South Wales you get about $10,000, and then on Queensland you can get up to $30,000. You've got to live in the property for at least 6 to 12 months, depending on your state. And of course, always read, the fine print. An example of this is Sarah buys a newly built townhouse in, say, Brisbane for $550,000, and because she's in Queensland, she gets up to $30,000 towards her deposit and pays no stamp duty. Woohoo, that's massive. So this extra cash can really help boost your deposit, number one, or which obviously then in turn, if you've bought well, helps reduce your home loan. Now, the downside of this is obviously only available to new properties. And I see this as being the risk being for this in particular is potentially overpaying, because the benefit of this may be actually built into the property price that you're buying. I feel like when this scheme came in, the cost of buying a brand new property increased because the developers factored in the fact you'd be getting, obviously, these particular benefits and exemptions and grants. So I think if you're going to buy brand new, you really need to do your research and really compare against other properties in the area that aren't necessarily brand new. I would hate for someone to overpay for something just to be able to clip their ticket with a particular offer or scheme. Be very, very careful. And of course, when it comes to whether you can flip it into an investment property, obviously after the owner-occupied period has passed, yes, you may rent it out. So again, this can be a really strategic way to start building an investment portfolio of property. And it's pretty generous, particularly in Queensland. Now, the fifth one is the family home guarantee for single parents. And this is the one I really want to focus on talking to you. And for anyone that knows a single parent that wants to buy a property, can you please make sure you send this episode and tell them to fast forward to this particular part because this is really important. So the family home guarantee is for single parents. It's where you can buy a home with as little as a 2% deposit and no lender's mortgage insurance. And as I said, it's for single parents with dependents, that is obviously children. To be eligible, you've got to be a single parent, obviously. You've got to have at least one dependent, and there is an income cap of $125,000 a year. Now, you can have actually previously owned a property, as long as you don't currently own a property. So for people who've maybe gone through a messy divorce, this could be a great way to get back into the property market if you've lost everything and you're rebuilding from scratch. So I'll work through an example with you now. Emma is a single mum. She's earning, say, $80,000 per year, and she buys a home for $500,000 with a 10% deposit, and she avoids having to pay $11,000 in lender's mortgage insurance, which is great. The upside is obviously it helps make home ownership for single parents achievable. And, the thing with having a mortgage is there's an element of forced savings because you have to make those mortgage repayments. And if you just stick with the bank's prescription of 30 years, over that 30-year period, you will eventually own your home outright if you're stuck to the repayments that the banks are giving you. And of course, and this is probably the intangible value of this particular scheme, is it helps create a sense of stability for single parents, but also the children of single parents. They don't have that, emotional distress and concern and worry of having to constantly move homes when the rents are put up, or the property that you're renting is then put on the market, and then having to move children from school to school to school. I think this one is really valuable, really important, and I feel like we need to be putting a lot of government money into boosting this and helping single parents out, particularly of young children. I know how much the impact of moving kids around, moving schools, moving into different neighborhoods, having to make new friendships, accessing different infrastructure, how that can impact a child well into their adulthood. We need to be able to create safe, stable grounds for children to thrive and flourish in. So I love this one. I really wish we could do more here in this space. The downside of this is, though, there's only 5,000 spots annually available. So if you want to do this and you're serious about this, get in quick and make sure you get some advice to help make sure that you apply for it correctly and your application goes through smoothly and obviously it's approved quickly. The downside of this, again, people just don't talk about this, and that is obviously you're taking out a much larger mortgage. If you're buying a property with only a 2% deposit, your mortgage is huge. You have to say, well, hang on, how's that person only been able to save a 2% deposit? Can they actually afford to take on this massive mortgage? And let's state the obvious. You're taking on a massive mortgages on one income. Now, I've been a single mum and I've taken on a massive mortgage on my own. I know, you sink or swim. And I had to learn myself to swim really quickly and keep my head above water for myself and my son Rocco at the time. So yes, I believe you and you can do it. But obviously, as I said, rose-tinted glasses off, eyes wide open, know exactly what you're getting yourself into. And understand obviously the impact of any interest rate rises. With this big mortgage, can you continue to service this mortgage if we have a 3% interest rate rise? Can you still stick to your lifestyle? Have you still got a good budget? What other additional things can you do to help pay that mortgage off quickly? How do you avoid falling into negative territory? Because it's the same risk as the other scheme. What if you buy that property for $500,000 and the property market comes off and it's, say, worth only $450,000, but yet you've got a $489,000 $90,000 home loan, you're in negative territory. So if I was going to do this as a single parent, would I do it? Hell yes, absolutely. But again, I would do the same thing again. I would work my absolute backside off to build a buffer to make sure, obviously, I had emergency money, particularly as a single parent on a sole income. I would make extra repayments above and beyond the minimum repayments. I'd be making lump sum repayments anytime I could. Even if it was only $10 extra per month or a random $100 deposit, I would just do it. And I would keep very close eyes to what the property was worth and obviously keep tracking and monitoring my mortgage so that it was actually coming down in the right direction. And the biggest and most powerful impact you can have on your home loan is in the first 5 years. So don't think when I get a pay rise or a promotion, I'll then start increasing my mortgage repayments. No, start sooner rather than later. And all you need to do is jump on the SugarMamma website and have a play around with the extra mortgage repayment calculator to see this impact. So yes, 100% I would do this. I love this. I would just wish it was bigger and more applicable, and there were more than 5,000 spots annually for single parents. But yeah, be very wise, be very safe, don't mess around. And the moment as a single parent, I've got episodes on for financial advice for single parents, I would remember that your home, again, is as a lifestyle choice. It's not everything. I'd start thinking about superannuation, salary sacrificing, investing, building passive income, all the other things that you need to do as a single parent to help make sure that you are completely financially independent. You never rely on a person or the government. And of course, you make your children proud by leading by example. All right, the last one is the shared equity scheme, which obviously is state-based. So this is where the state governments co-purchase a property with you, reducing the amount that you need to borrow. Now, examples of this, obviously, Victoria has the Home Buyer Fund and the government contributes up to 25%. WA also has a Key Start shared ownership program. And you buy, say, 75% of the property and the government owns the remaining 25%. And when you go to sell or refinance even, you have to pay back the government's share. So I'll give you an example. Let's take Tom, and he buys a property for, say, $600,000 in Melbourne under the VIC scheme. And the government contributes $150,000 towards this. So it would mean that Tom is only borrowing $450,000. And, he pays, obviously, a smaller deposit because the government's contributed. Now, the pros of this, obviously, it makes properties more affordable. And because he's got a smaller mortgage, thanks to the government, his mortgage repayments are much lower. However, this is a little bit of a trap. And I would hate for you to become a victim of this and discover this too late in life. You don't actually own the whole property, obviously. You own 75% of it. But yet, you are left to cover 100% of the outgoings, those ongoing costs. The insurance, the strata, any sort of wear and tear, body corporates. And if you go and renovate that property, don't forget you're also increasing the government's 25% of that value. So if I, for example, with Tom, he renovates it and turns it into an $800,000 home, the government will be taking 25% of that upgain. Yet Tom has the one who's paid for it. He's done all the hard work to increase its value, taking it from 600 to 800. So, be very, very careful of that. And of course, the flip side works as well. If that $600,000 property goes down in value, the government has to share in that 25% loss. But this is where I see the trap. It's actually more of a danger in the element of security. Tom is loving life on a $450,000 mortgage, which for him may be really easy to service. And therefore, he's kind of on easy street, perhaps. He thinks it's fine, the government owns 25%, I don't really care, and he's living life, and so he should. And this is not, I say this without judgment. However, he may wake up one day and go, you know what, I have been spending all my money. I haven't actually benefited from having a smaller mortgage. And in fact, I've only just stuck to making the minimum repayments. I've never actually paid this property off. And he can actually end up being not that much better off, particularly if he's had large outgoings associated with this property. And, anyone who's owned property will tell you about the cost of maintaining it, wear and tear, replacing roofs, getting things fixed in the garden, broken walls, plumbing, electrical work. This stuff can be really expensive and you're wearing all of those costs. So Tom may wake up 10 years down the track and go, you know what, I've only paid off, a small amount of my home loan. I've only paid off, say $20,000. I still owe $430,000 and my property hasn't really gone up in value that much. He's not actually any better off. And this is fine if he wants to stay remaining in that property, but what if he wants to sell? He doesn't really have that much of a deposit or equity to sort of carry forward into the next property. So do I like this? I don't mind it, but I think you need to use it very, very carefully. And of course, you can't actually use this as an investment property. You've got to remain in the property as a primary residence at all times. So in a nutshell, would I use this? I would if I had to. This is what I'd be doing. I'd be paying it off as quickly as possible. And at the right time, I would get out of this as quickly as possible. So the moment I could see that I had enough of a deposit, if I sold this property, paid back the government their 25% share, plus obviously any gains, I would then go on and try and do this on my own independently. I would try and make extra mortgage repayments, both regular and ad hoc lump sum, because obviously that increases the equity. It means you have a smaller deposit to carry into the next property. So I think it's a great way to get into the market. It's a great way to create a sense of stability in the short, medium, and even long term, but I'd be very careful not to put all my eggs in one basket just in that property. And if I did stay in that property, I would most definitely be doing a range of other things to build my wealth, to build my financial independence, such as my superannuation, having emergency money, and of course, investing in long-term growing passive income streams. Now, as I wrap up today's episode, I would obviously make it very clear. Government support can help you give the leg up that you need and you are entitled to. But it is definitely not a substitute for planning, budgeting, or even self-discipline that you need to build within yourself. Plus, financial freedom isn't just about owning a home. It's about emergency money, having investments, having passive income, superannuation, and of course, having wealth protection via personal insurance, such as income protection, trauma cover, life and TPD cover. Having a home is just one thing, and really it is, at the end of the day, a lifestyle choice and asset. Now, these schemes can most definitely help reduce costs, and they accelerate the entry into the market, which is really important, and build a future investment portfolio potentially. But you've got to use them wisely. You've got to follow the rules, the terms and conditions, read the fine print, and get professional advice along the way. So if you are serious about buying your first property, that's awesome. I'm so proud of you and I'm so excited for you. Let me know how you're going. I love hearing from everyone who listens to my episodes. And of course, go and speak to a licensed mortgage broker. If you need a recommendation, just send me a DM on Instagram. I'll come back to you. Of course, speak to a financial planner. Spend some time listening to them, what they think, what could be good for you, and what other things you could be doing other than buying a home. You may actually realize that buying a property isn't actually right for you right now. And of course, they are going to help give you a strategy that will suit your needs, your goals, and your understanding, and actually see whether you're actually eligible for this in the first place and which option is best for you. So promise me this, you don't wait for the perfect moment. Use these tools now to understand how they work and how they can actually help you make smart, informed decisions when it comes to getting on the property ladder as a first home buyer. Now, that is it for today's episode. Thank you everybody for listening to Sugar Mama's Fireplay. If you found this episode helpful, please can you take a moment to share it with someone who is dreaming of buying their first home. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a chance to fire up your financial future with Sugar Mama's Fireplay. All right, until next time, stay intentional, stay empowered, and keep that financial fire burning bright within. This is Sugar Mama's Fireplay.